Welcome, dear listener, to A Peaceful Journey, a gentle exploration of thoughts that have echoed through time, shaping our understanding of what it means to simply. Tonight we will drift into the quiet depths of a mind that sought to unravel the very fabric of human existence, transforming what might seem like daunting questions into a soothing pathway towards self-understanding and profound peace. Let us allow our minds to gently unfurl, releasing the tensions of the day as we prepare to embrace the tranquil narrative of Jean-Paul Sartre, a philosopher whose reflections offer a unique lens through which to view our lives, guiding us towards a restful slumber. For countless centuries, humanity found solace and purpose in a beautifully simple narrative that a divine creator had woven us into existence, imbuing us with a clear purpose. This understanding offered a comforting psychological anchor, relieving us of the burden of crafting our own meaning. Our path seemed clear, divinely ordained to live righteously, and in doing so secure a serene afterlife. Yet, even within this elegant story, a subtle tension existed, the gift of free will. This capacity for choice, for both good and ill, introduced a delicate complexity, a whisper of individual responsibility that hinted at deeper questions awaiting exploration. It was a neat, comforting tale, allowing the mind to rest, knowing its ultimate destination was already charted. Then, across the gentle landscapes of Europe, a quiet revolution began to stir. The scientific awakening, with its steady gaze upon the observable world, began to gently question the simple, overarching religious explanations. Minds like Copernicus, Galileo, Newton, and later Darwin offered new perspectives, subtle shifts in understanding that challenged previously held truths about our place in the cosmos. Philosophers in turn sought answers in this burgeoning scientific understanding, hoping to find a new bedrock for meaning. Yet, science, in its profound utility, revealed itself as a tool for survival and comfort, enriching our lives with technology and medicine, but remaining silent on the deepest question of all, the ultimate meaning of our fleeting existence. The 17th and 18th centuries witnessed another quiet transformation, a shift towards humanism, gently placing rational humanity at the center of the universe, replacing the divine with the individual intellect. Progress became the soft, guiding star, the ultimate aim of life. However, the subsequent centuries, marked by the tumultuous echoes of Napoleonic conflicts and the devastating crescendos of two world wars, revealed a different truth. The quiet hope in human rationality and inevitable progress seemed to falter, unveiling the enduring primitive layers of our psychology, a raw, untamed essence that our refined tools and weapons only amplified rather than subdued. Our hearts, it seemed, remained as complex and primal as they had been in ancient times. It was into this evolving tapestry of human thought that Jean-Paul Sartre, with his contemplative spirit, stepped forward, offering a fresh, yet profoundly comforting perspective on the meaning of life. He gently suggested that perhaps, in the absence of a preordained divine blueprint, lies not despair, but an immense, quiet opportunity. Without a fixed divine essence residing within us from birth, we are, in a profound and liberating sense, a blank canvas. This very emptiness, this gentle void, invites us to become the artists of our own being, to carefully, thoughtfully, and with deep intention, craft our own essence. Sartre quietly ushered in the philosophy of existentialism, a gentle counterpoint to earlier essentialist views. He proposed that our existence simply is first, and only then, through our choices and actions, do we begin to sculpt our essence. Imagine, if you will, being born as an empty slate, and it becomes our quiet privilege, our sacred responsibility, to draw a beautiful, unique story upon it. line by gentle line. If religious belief offered a carefully planned itinerary for life, existentialism in Sartre's view was more akin to a thoughtful backpacking journey, where the path unfolds with each deliberate step, allowing us to adapt and create as we go. So, as we settle into this quiet moment, letting our minds ease, we will embark on a tranquil exploration of Jean-Paul Sartre's life, his profound writings, and the philosophical insights he offered. We will gently uncover some quiet secrets that can illuminate our own paths towards understanding and inner peace. Let your mind become like an empty cup, ready to receive these reflections on nothingness, the void, and the deep, calming implications of existence. By the end of our journey tonight, you may find that Sartre's ideas resonate with a quiet familiarity, like the wisdom shared by a beloved elder, gently guiding you towards a restful sleep. Jean-Paul Sartre was born in the bustling heart of Paris in 1905, into a bourgeois family, a world of quiet comforts and intellectual stirrings. A mere 2 years later, a tender age for such a profound loss, his father passed away, and his mother eventually remarried. As a young boy, his small stature and a challenging eye condition made him susceptible to the cruelties of childhood bullying, an experience that undoubtedly left quiet impressions on his developing spirit, perhaps even sowing the early seeds of his later philosophical focus on alienation and the individual's solitary struggle. Despite these early difficulties, the quiet stability of his family's wealth allowed him access to some of the most esteemed schools, cradles of thought, where he first encountered the intricate dance of philosophy and psychology. It was in these halls that he also formed connections with individuals who would later become influential figures in the vibrant intellectual landscape of France. Among his earliest quiet influences was Henri Bergson, whose philosophy of vitalism gently emphasized human intuition as a guiding light, a subtle internal compass in our understanding of reality. Bergson's reflections on time also cast a soft glow upon the works of Marcel Proust, particularly his masterful In Search of Lost Time, a sprawling exploration of memory and sensation, a quiet treasure trove for many, including perhaps Sartre himself, albeit with a later divergence of perspective. While Proust found solace in the established salons of Parisian society, Sartre, with his slightly unconventional appearance, and perhaps a deep-seated feeling of being an outsider, gravitated towards the burgeoning anti-establishment intellectual scene. He found comfort and a quiet strength in challenging the status quo, orchestrating public events, and even playful hoaxes that, despite attracting thousands and causing a gentle stir, solidified his place as a voice of dissent. This personal sense of alienation, perhaps stemming from his appearance, may have subtly predisposed him to a philosophy like existentialism, where everything begins from a quiet blank slate, offering a profound sense of belonging by allowing one to forge their own identity. Those who are comfortably aligned with conventional notions of beauty or societal norms often find less need to question the established order. Sartre, a man of modest height, just 153 centimeters or 5 feet tall, carried within him a quiet desire to reshape reality itself. In the year 1929, a significant encounter unfolded in his life. He met Simone de Beauvoir, a feminist philosopher with whom he forged a lifelong open relationship. Sartre, in his exercise of personal freedom, often extended this liberty to his romantic life more extensively than de Beauvoir did. During his time as a school teacher, a period of quiet reflection and intellectual growth, Sartre immersed himself in the brilliant work of Louis Ferdinand's Serene Journey to the End of the Night. This anti-war, anti-establishment, and deeply pessimistic yet profoundly beautiful novel, which has been discussed in other contexts, resonated deeply with his evolving worldview. A year later, in 1933, seeking deeper understanding, He journeyed to Germany to study under Edmund Husserl, the quiet progenitor of German phenomenology. It was around this time that he also delved into another profound work, Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, a philosophical tapestry that gently positions history as a crucial weaver of our identities. It suggested that we are in essence products of the historical currents and the specific period in which we find ourselves. Hegel held a quiet belief in progressive history, an idea that humanity was steadily moving towards a utopian ideal, a concept later adapted by Marx into the vision of a communist state. For Hegel, certain figures, like Napoleon, could embody the very spirit of the age, a powerful force that captured the collective imagination. By a striking coincidence, as Sartre quietly pursued his studies in Germany, another formidable figure was steadily ascending to power. In 1933, Hitler's Nazi Party clinched victory in the German elections. From a Hegelian perspective, Hitler, in his own unsettling way, managed to capture the imagination, the very spirit of the age, of Germany in the 1930s. However, Sartre, with his keen analytical mind, perceived Hegel's historically grounded philosophy not as an endpoint, but as a fertile starting point for nurturing his own brand of existential thought. Instead of solely focusing on the shaping influence of societal history on our identity, Sartre gently shifted the spotlight to our individual histories, emphasizing the profound power we possess to shape ourselves into the beings we aspire to become. In essence, Sartre quietly synthesized the social history of Hegel with the individual freedom championed by Kierkegaard, giving rise to an individualistic existentialism. It was a philosophy that affirmed not only the molding hand of society, but more crucially, the boundless opportunities presented by our personal lives to make choices, to craft our identities, and to forge our very essence. But we shall delve deeper into the quiet intricacies of his philosophy a little later. In 1938, a significant milestone arrived with the publication of his most renowned philosophical novel, Nausea. In its pages, the protagonist, Antoine Roquentin, experiences a profound internal discomfort, a feeling akin to nausea, arising from the perception of his life as empty, devoid of inherent meaning, as if he were an unconscious object drifting through existence. Sartre drew subtle inspiration from Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground, where the unnamed protagonist retreats entirely from society, isolating himself in an underground room, much like an injured animal, quietly refusing any offers of help. Similarly, in Kafka's The Metamorphosis, the protagonist undergoes a startling transformation into an insect, rendered incapable of supporting his family, who then, in a somber turn, ultimately determine his fate. In Sartre's novel, however, the protagonist, upon realizing the profound emptiness of his life, undergoes an internal metamorphosis, emerging transformed into an existential hero, ready to embrace the quiet challenge of self-creation. The timing of this novel, published a year before Hitler's world-altering invasion, carried a poignant resonance. German soldiers and generals, in their unquestioning obedience to authority, perhaps quietly abdicated their individual responsibility. While Hegel might have observed the grand currents of history, Sartre gently placed the onus directly on the individual. With the outbreak of World War II in 1939, Sartre was quietly conscripted into the French army. A year later, he was captured by the Germans. Ironically, in Serlene's novel, the protagonist actively seeks to be captured by the Germans, leading one to quietly wonder if this might have, in some subtle way, influenced Sartre's eventual surrender, perhaps recognizing the slim chances of the French against the overwhelming German forces. Joking aside, he diligently utilized his time in captivity for quiet reading and writing. Celine's protagonist indeed muses that prison during wartime offered a paradoxical sanctuary, protecting prisoners from the direct brutalities of the battlefield. This period of quiet confinement also afforded Sartre the precious gift of uninterrupted focus, allowing him to delve into the intensely challenging philosophical work of Martin Heidegger, Being and Time. Prison, in its own stark way, offered both existence and time for profound reflection. Heidegger's philosophy gently rooted itself in the finite nature of individual time, a brief span cradled between birth and death. The quiet awareness of life's brevity, he suggested, compels us to anticipate our eventual demise, urging us towards a more authentic way of living. Sartre would later, in a direct yet contemplative response to Heidegger's magnum opus, compose his own philosophical masterpiece, Being and Nothingness. In 1941, due to his quietly deteriorating health, specifically his failing eyesight, Sartre was released by the Germans. He resumed his role as a school teacher. With access to numerous students and a wealth of time for reflection, he quietly embarked on political activism, co-founding a socialist group called Socialisme et Liberté, Socialism and Freedom. This group in essence took the inspiring slogan of the 1789 French Revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity, and subtly removed fraternity, given its nationalistic connotations. However, his group struggled to garner widespread support from other prominent French writers and intellectuals. This was partly due to the strangely polite and respectful, though still oppressive, manner in which the German occupiers treated the French populace, and partly because intellectuals were understandably reluctant to risk their hard-won freedom. Consequently, Sartre quietly disbanded the group and redirected his profound energies towards writing his masterpiece, Being and Nothingness, which was eventually published in 1943. We will delve deeper into its quiet intricacies later. During the German occupation, Sartre continued to write, penning thoughtful articles that gently lamented the French appeasement of the Germans. These pieces found a quiet home in various newspapers, including Combat, a publication co-founded by another towering figure of French existentialism, Albert Camus. The two philosophers, bound by a shared intellectual spirit, were close friends in the vibrant intellectual milieu of 1940s Paris. However, their paths later diverged, marked by a quiet yet significant falling out over political differences, particularly after Camus published his philosophical work, The Rebel, in 1951. Sartre, in his commitment to revolutionary change, favored a Maoist-style Marxist revolution, advocating for the forceful seizure of power, especially in colonized Africa and Asia. Camus, in contrast, gently championed peaceful reforms as the path to political transformation. Their disagreements also extended to the quiet, yet deeply divisive, question of how to treat French collaborators during the German occupation. Sartre argued for swift capital punishment, while Camus advocated for a less harsh retribution. Once again, it was a quiet tension between the immediate forceful act of violence and the gradual, patient process of reform. During the Cold War, that era of quiet ideological struggle between the socialist East and the capitalist West, Sartre quietly aligned himself with the Russians. However, at a more fundamental level, his deepest sympathies lay with the impoverished global South, fighting against the lingering shadows of European colonialism, particularly in Algeria. He embarked on journeys to Cuba, where he quietly met with revolutionary figures like Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, and also traveled to the Soviet Union. Sartre, with his astute perception, recognized Europe's gradual quiet loss of global dominance to the rising powers of America in the West and Russia in the East. He therefore proposed a unified European vision, a gentle coalescing of all European peoples. He observed that individuals across the continent shared similar quiet struggles: poverty, inadequate housing, or limitations on freedom. making a unified European effort a logical and compelling aspiration. He also understood that the European working class, having experienced the exhaustion of past conflicts, no longer harbored a strong appetite for revolution, thus directing his hopes for socialist transformation primarily towards the Third World. Sartre remained a quiet, yet staunch, opponent of American political and cultural imperialism, perceiving its pervasive influence even on the French. Throughout the 1960s, Sartre maintained a quiet yet influential presence in student demonstrations in Paris, becoming a household name, widely regarded as the era's most ardent champion of social justice. In 1968, he was arrested for civil disobedience, but was famously pardoned by Charles de Gaulle, who, in a quiet gesture of respect, likened him to Voltaire, the revered figure of individual liberty. In 1964, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature, but in a characteristic act of quiet defiance, he refused to accept it. His rejection stemmed from his political stance against the capitalist West, but also from a deeper conviction that accepting the prize would, in his view, subtly integrate him into the very institution he sought to critique, thereby compromising his independence as a writer. In the same year, he quietly criticized literature as a whole, perceiving it as merely a soothing instrument, a gentle distraction. In a similar vein, George Orwell, in his anti-art essay, posited that art ultimately serves the interests of the ruling class. Sartre also directed a quiet critique at the artistic writing of Marcel Proust, dismissing it as bourgeois fantasy, but in his view gently softened and protected one from the harsh realities of life. As a profound admirer of Proust, one might concede that Sartre had a point, in that Proust's writing can indeed be seen as a form of retreat from direct societal engagement, while Sartre's essence yearned for active involvement. In his 1945 novel trilogy, The Roads to Freedom, Sartre subtly critiques Proust's perceived escape from social and political issues through the sanctuary of art. Instead, Sartre passionately advocates for engaging directly with political and social life, striving to transform society by fostering greater freedom. However, I personally find myself still drawn more frequently to Proust than to Sartre, for Proust in his quiet brilliance unveils an artistic beauty that often eludes our direct gaze in everyday life, especially when the demands of politics sometimes blind us to subtle forms of beauty. I suppose I lean towards the tranquil, introspective, artistic life championed by Proust, over the more overtly political path of Sartre. Not to say Sartre was unseeing. Despite his visual impairment, he perceived the world through a Marxist class lens, whereas Proust intuitively perceived things, almost closer to nature itself, with a gentle, artistic sensibility. In 1971, he published the first volume of a monumental biography of Gustave Flaubert, a deep psychological analysis of the great French writer. In this work, Sartre quietly posited that an epileptic seizure Flaubert experienced in 1843, at the tender age of 22, definitively sealed his fate as a writer, gently forcing him to abandon his initial aspiration of becoming a lawyer. However, this meticulously detailed Flaubert biography remained unfinished, as Sartre's own health steadily declined, leading to complete blindness in 1973. He passed away peacefully in 1980, at the age of 74. As a widely celebrated public intellectual, his funeral attracted a quiet multitude of 50,000 people, gently bringing the streets of Paris to a standstill, perhaps also a testament to the Parisian inclination for street gatherings, whether for protests, strikes, or solemn funerals. Any quiet reason to pause from the daily routine. I jest, of course. Sartre began his philosophical journey as a quiet champion of the individual, but later in life, he diligently worked to reconcile his individualistic existential philosophy with the more collective framework of Marxism, which interprets the world not through the lens of the solitary individual but through the broader perspective of the group, specifically the class. This stands in gentle contrast to Camus, who initially embraced Marxism but towards the end of his life quietly distanced himself from its tenets. Today, Sartre is primarily remembered for his profound existential philosophy, so in the quiet moments that follow, we will first discuss his renowned novel, Nausea, before delving into his philosophical magnum opus, Being and Nothingness. Later, we will explore his philosophy of existentialism in more detail, before quietly uncovering 10 philosophical insights we can gently glean from his life and work. Now let us turn our attention to the soft whispers of Sartre's first and most famous literary work, Nausea, a philosophical novel published in 1938. It tells the story of Antoine Roquentin, a solitary and disillusioned historian who feels a profound unease. He believes that the sheer weight of inanimate objects and the ceaseless clamor of external events make it utterly impossible for him to define himself or to possess any truly independent thoughts. In essence, he finds himself unable to separate, to disentangle himself as a distinct autonomous entity. This pervasive sense of intellectual paralysis, this quiet quandary, inflicts upon him a pervasive. Here our quiet journey takes us back to the 16th century, to the brilliant mind of René Descartes, the celebrated rationalist philosopher. Descartes undertook a profound thought experiment, questioning the very certainty of his own existence. He eventually arrived at the compelling conclusion that even if he were to doubt his existence entirely, the sheer fact that he could doubt his existence implicitly confirmed that he did exist. Thus, this famous philosophical inquiry bequeathed us the immortal phrase, "I think, therefore I am." Now listen to a quiet echo from Nausea itself. My thoughts are me. That's why I can't stop. I exist because I think, and I can't stop myself from thinking. At this very moment it's frightful. If I exist, it is because I am horrified at existing. I am the one who pulls myself from the nothingness to which I aspire. Jean-Paul Sartre. Sartre, in his expansive contemplation, is concerned not merely with the telescopic development of a character, the fluctuating arcs and ascensions of a hero's journey, but rather he adopts a microscopic approach, a quiet, penetrating gaze to address the most pressing question of existence itself. He gently probes how life itself can induce this profound feeling of nausea. Antoine is presented as a modern man, afflicted by a distinctly modern malady, a creeping sense of meaninglessness, a profound nihilism that quietly sickens him. As Sartre articulates, existence is not something which lets itself be thought of from a distance. It must invade you suddenly, get hold of you, weigh heavy on your heart like a great motionless beast, or else there is nothing at all. Jean-Paul Sartre. In other words, the modern condition for Sartre is a quiet void that emerges when the concept of God truly recedes within us, and this subtle decomposition of the divine essence within our souls precipitates the feeling of nausea, a profound inner sickness. This very theme of nihilism, this quiet emptiness, also surfaces in the evocative narratives of Dostoevsky and Camus, and resonates profoundly in the writings of Friedrich Nietzsche. Indeed, Nietzsche's understanding of the human condition profoundly shaped a significant portion of Sartre's own character and thought. Sartre quietly observed, "It has always become, and but for the possibility of death, it would never end." In a quiet attempt to grasp this elusive feeling, Antoine begins to keep a diary, meticulously chronicling his experience of nausea. But the sensation only intensifies as days gently bleed into weeks, often becoming utterly overwhelming. He records everything, including a meticulous list of the mundane objects he encounters. At one point he gazes into a mirror, a moment of quiet confusion, believing he sees the 19th century politician he is researching, rather than his own reflection. In essence, he quietly doubts the authenticity of his own being, wondering if he is merely a phantom of the past. This quiet contemplation of history suddenly illuminates a profound connection. His feeling of nausea is inextricably linked to the very fact of his existence. Nausea has not left me, and I don't think it will leave me soon, but I no longer have to endure it. It is no longer a sickness or a passing fit. It is I, Sartre writes in Nausea. In other words, his entire existence, his very being, has become synonymous with this unsettling, pervasive nausea. Another gentle whisper from the novel: the nausea is not inside me. I feel it there in the wall, in the suspenders everywhere around me. It makes itself one with the cafe. I am the one who is within it. Antoine realizes, with a quiet clarity, that the primary reason for his existence, his purpose, if you will, is to think, to research, and to write about the past. He reflects, I live in the past. I take everything that happened to me, and arrange it. From such a distance, it does no harm. You almost let yourself fall into it. Our whole story is beautiful, more or less. I give it a few incentives, and it makes a whole series of perfect moments. Then I close my eyes, and try to imagine I am still living inside it. In essence, beyond his singular objective of composing a book about a long-dead 19th century politician, his life is utterly devoid of inherent meaning. He possesses no close friends, no immediate family. There is nothing else to anchor his existence. This, he realizes, is the very reason he initially moved to this quiet town. This is the sole impetus for waking each morning to write. This is the fundamental reason he continues to live. In other words, he is profoundly detached from the vibrancy of the present moment. This sense of alienation from others, this quiet detachment, which curiously is often seen as beneficial by Buddhists, paradoxically makes him feel profoundly ill. This quiet, profound epiphany unfolds before a chestnut tree, a scene as famously evocative as Newton's apple tree, which, in its quiet descent, first allowed him to grasp the concept of gravity. For Sartre, the chestnut tree becomes the silent catalyst, allowing his character to discover the essential emptiness of existence, the very seed of existentialism. The chestnut tree, he realizes, possesses no inherent essence of its own. It is only we, the conscious observers, who bestow upon it particular characteristics, its taste, its fragrance, its color, its weight. In other words, objects in themselves do not inherently display or offer up their own meaning. Their meaning, rather, resides solely within the conscious observer, within the crucible of human awareness. Therefore it falls upon us, as conscious beings, to quietly and intentionally create meaning for ourselves as well. Life then becomes our precious opportunity to craft something of ourselves, to define our own color, our own taste, our own fragrance, our overarching identity. Thus Sartre as protagonist uncovers a simple, yet profoundly revolutionary concept that existence precedes essence. In other words, life simply is first, and its meaning unfurls only afterwards. There is no preordained God, no divine essence pre-inscribed within us from birth. We quietly invent it. This epiphany grants him a profound sense of liberation, a gentle release he had quietly yearned for through days and weeks of profound unease. For the very first time, he feels truly free, at least within the sanctuary of his own mind. He attempts to articulate this newfound understanding to others, including a former girlfriend and a man in a quiet cafe, but neither seems to grasp the profound nature of his insights. Consequently, he abandons his historical research and with a quiet resolve, decides to embrace the present moment. He also makes the choice to move to Paris and embark on writing a novel, perhaps sensing that his profound discovery might be more readily conveyed and interpreted through the evocative power of fiction. Unlike Dostoevsky, who yearned for the gentle return of God to confront nihilism, Sartre, in his quiet audacity, perceives the death of God not as a tragedy, but as a profound opportunity for us to forge our own meaning. While Nietzsche believed that only a select few, the artists and philosophers, were capable of creating values, Sartre, as a socialist and democrat, sought to extend this profound opportunity to everyone, allowing each individual to define their own life. Instead of relying on the quiet decrees of deities, the responsibility, he gently insisted, rests squarely upon our shoulders to sculpt our own essence. There is a quiet, ongoing debate about whether Nausea should be classified as a philosophical treatise or a work of fiction, whether its essence lies primarily in art or in philosophy. Sartre himself, it seems, penned this novel as a quiet response to Céline's magnificent work, Journey to the End of the Night, published approximately 6 years prior. A novel that, despite its profound darkness and despair, was incredibly artistic and hugely successful in the 1930s. Sartre therefore concluded his novel on a cautiously optimistic note, desiring to gently liberate us from the despair of a modern, empty existence, a void so starkly portrayed in Kafka's tales of alienation and despair, as well as in Céline's narratives. Sartre in this work also quietly asserts a political statement that we bear the responsibility for transforming ourselves, and by extension society and history itself. As a Marxist, he wished to infuse people with the quiet hope that we possess the freedom to change things. Sartre also considered humanism to be quietly problematic, for it subtly presumed that all human beings possessed the same rational faculty. In other words, humanism, in a sense, resembled religion in its assumption that we are pre-installed with some inherent essence from birth. For Sartre, individual choice always came first. Another point of gentle contention with humanism was Sartre's belief that humanists tended to privilege certain individuals, elevating some above others. Some humans, for instance, might become sages or super beings, as Nietzsche suggested in his theory of the Übermensch. For Sartre, however, everything, every value, every standard is human-made, and therefore nothing is inherently sacred. His anti-establishment and anti-traditional views resonated deeply with young people who, feeling alienated from society, quietly yearned to topple old idols, to break free from all traditions, especially within the hallowed grounds of university campuses. Another significant novel to compare Nausea with is Marcel Proust's monumental masterpiece, In Search of Lost Time, where Proust, in his quiet, introspective way, perceived fragments of our past selves, subtly stored within objects. For Proust, our senses allowed us to gently retrieve these former selves, preserved within a particular taste, a melody, or even a solid object. Sartre, who held a quiet political opposition to Proust for his perceived silence on the war, sought to distance us from this reliance on objects. Proust, in his exquisite prose, suggests that we are akin to animals marking territory, leaving parts of ourselves on rocks, trees, and bushes for others to notice, but also for ourselves to rediscover when we return to those familiar things. For humans, our senses of smell, taste, and touch can involuntarily transport us back to a piece of our past, a moment we might have quietly forgotten. However, Sartre gently argues that this Proustian notion of living outside ourselves, within objects and people, is precisely what induces this profound, unsettling feeling of nausea. As he states, you shouldn't touch objects because they are not alive. You use them, put them back in their place, live among them. They are useful, no more, but they touch me. It is unbearable. I'm afraid of coming into contact with them, as if they were living beasts. This external reliance, he suggests, quietly diminishes our freedom and our sense of independence. Sartre therefore gently endeavors to grant us freedom, but crucially also the profound responsibility to declare that our existence is unequivocally our own. Our quiet task is to make something of it. Do not, he urges, depend on others or on mere objects to define you. Only you uniquely can define yourself. You alone must bear the gentle yet profound burden of your own existence. Do not etch yourself onto some silent rock or tree, for they neither care for nor preserve you. It is only by embracing the responsibility of our existence that we can quietly yet powerfully combat nihilism and despair. Sartre's character finds his essence, or rather the lack thereof, feeling suspended in trees and external objects. This mirrors in a way Proust's novel In Search of Lost Time, where the protagonist's memories and sense of being are triggered by sensory information embedded in the objects he encounters. In other words, we quietly store fragments of our being in the objects, people or relationships we experience. And when we revisit those objects, we recall people and quiet snippets of our past lives. While Proust perceived this as beautiful and artistic, Sartre found it rather disgusting, for it implied that our existence could only derive meaning from external things. In other words, he believed we possessed no inherent essence. Everything seemed to exist outside ourselves. It was within Nauset that Sartre quietly articulated his central existentialist philosophy that existence comes first, and our essence is then built upon it. From a traditional, religious, and even some philosophical perspectives, our essence, our inherent humanity, was considered primary. But Sartre gently inverted this notion. We simply exist, and through our choices and actions, we subsequently acquire the essence of who we are. In other words, we are born as a clean blank slate, and as we mature, we slowly, consciously become a person. We possess the profound freedom to sculpt the statue of our own being. By the novel's quiet conclusion, the protagonist's confrontation with nothingness, this deep void paradoxically liberates him to create his own meaning. Yet, this liberation comes with a price. He is now unequivocally responsible for his own actions and choices. Sartre also viewed Proust as a somewhat arrogant bourgeois figure who lived in bad faith, a false existence predicated more on social status than on genuine self-realization. I must gently disagree here. I believe Proust was a genius artist, and while perhaps arrogant, he was also a magnificent writer, crafting one of the most exquisitely beautiful novels of the 20th century. For Proust, humanity's greatest adversary was not nihilism, but time itself. Time, in its relentless passage, evokes a profound sense of emptiness, for we anticipate our eventual demise long before death actually arrives. Regardless of the weight of responsibility one chooses to bear, there is little defense against the slow, inexorable decline of life, its gentle dissolution across the expanse of time. While Proust acknowledged human nature, particularly how biological realities like our physiological sensory organs influence our memory of existence, Sartre, it seems, quietly denied human nature, linking it to the divine and the unconscious, and then gently rejecting them all. In other words, since there is no God, we possess absolute freedom to become whatever we wish to be. This implies a quiet, profound ability to even alter our biological nature, if not in physical reality, then at least within the boundless realm of our minds. Subjectivity and objectivity lie at the very heart of this quiet philosophical inquiry. Humans, as conscious beings, cast a gentle spotlight upon objects, a mental structure akin to a Kantian flame that allows us to comprehend, organize, and categorize the external world. Yet, Sartre, much like Nietzsche, believed that humanity itself is not a fixed, solid entity. Rather, we are in a constant state of becoming, perpetually changing. Thus, the tangible external world acts as a quiet anchor, something we try to grasp to keep ourselves upright and stable. The self, then, is like a floating phantom, striving to solidify into a concrete being. External objects in this view are like a gyroscope, gently maintaining our equilibrium. This inherent instability of existence, for Sartre, is both the exhilarating freedom to craft ourselves as we wish, but also a source of quiet destruction, for it induces anxiety, as Kierkegaard gently observed a century earlier. Indeed, it was Kierkegaard who first articulated that freedom, in its boundless expanse, can cause us a profound sense of dizziness and anxiety. As we know, dizziness is intimately linked to nausea. Thus, the very title of Sartre's novel and its central idea can be traced back to the quiet insights of Kierkegaard. The act of free choice itself engenders anxiety, a phenomenon evident in what is often termed analysis paralysis, that quiet struggle when faced with a multitude of options, like deciding which video to watch on YouTube or Netflix. In essence, nausea tells the quiet story of a man who, for the first time, confronts his own existence, an encounter that not only frightens him, but also evokes a profound, unsettling nausea. Yet, he emerges from this experience liberated, free to become the person he truly desires to be. The responsibility, he realizes, rests solely with him and no one else. Not God, not human nature, not society, only he alone. Now, let us turn our minds to the quiet profundity of Jean-Paul Sartre's Being and Nothingness, an essay on phenomenological ontology published in 1943. This monumental work is widely regarded as a cornerstone of existentialist philosophy. If nausea stands as his most significant fictional contribution, then Being and Nothingness is undoubtedly his most weighty non-fictional opus. During his quiet confinement in a German prison camp in the 1940s, far removed from the clamor of conflict, Sartre sat and immersed himself in one of the most challenging philosophical texts of the era, Martin Heidegger's magisterial Being and Time. In this profound work, the German philosopher gently posited that it is the awareness of death that bestows upon life a meaning it otherwise lacks. In other words, to live a truly authentic life, one must fully and consciously acknowledge the inevitability of one's own mortality. Sartre, in turn, composed his own book as a direct, yet deeply considered, response to Heidegger. More importantly, it was a profound counter-argument to the long-held religious notion that God created us, imbuing us with an inherent purpose. Sartre gently asserts, "No, we are not something before our birth, before our existence. We are born first. We simply are. And only then do we gradually become something with an essence. We possess no divine essence, no preordained creator. Like a flower, we sprout, we grow, we blossom into a unique bloom, but no one plants us with a fixed design. We are, in a profound sense, self-made." Sartre also quietly challenges the psychoanalytical movement, led by Sigmund Freud, who argued for the existence of an entirely new hidden realm beneath the conscious mind, a vast space called the unconscious, where all manner of repressed emotions, urges, and ideas are meticulously stored. According to psychoanalysts like Freud and Carl Jung, this unconscious realm is vastly more expansive and influential than the conscious mind. In essence, they suggest that we are only dimly aware of a mere fraction of what truly transpires within our minds. Sartre, however, gently dismisses this as an unhelpful notion. He argues that we possess no hidden self, no elusive essence, gently floating within a subconscious cavern or a murky psychological soup. Instead, he maintains, we are precisely what we know ourselves to be. Anything of which we are not conscious he asserts, is simply not us. Thus Sartre aligns himself with René Descartes' fundamental premise, I think therefore I am. However, unlike Descartes, Sartre does not believe in innate knowledge, in pre-existing ideas from birth. For Sartre, the profound truth remains, existence precedes essence. We are born, and only then do we gradually, through our choices and actions, develop our sense of self. Edmund Husserl, the quiet German philosopher, served as Sartre's teacher at one point. Husserl's philosophy, known as phenomenology, gently asserts that our consciousness is invariably conscious of something. When we know something, we are always apprehending a specific object, an entity, an idea, or an image. This concept quietly harkens back to Kant, who thoughtfully divided knowledge into two realms, the world of phenomena, which is knowable through our animal senses and perception, and noumena, which is the unknowable world of things in themselves. So phenomenology, in essence, is the philosophy of consciousness as it navigates the world of phenomena that we come to know through our senses, gently setting aside or ignoring the unknowable realms, such as God, the afterlife, or even the hidden unconscious posited by psychoanalysis. For Sartre, therefore, our consciousness is deeply rooted in objects. It does not spring forth from itself, nor from a divine source. Sartre, in his quiet reflections, thus concludes that consciousness is inextricably linked to objects. It does not originate from within itself, nor from any divine source. But Sartre also adds a profound nuance. Not only does consciousness enable us to be aware of the world, but consciousness is also simultaneously aware of itself as a kind of transparent phenomenon. It is not merely conscious of objects, but concurrently conscious of this very awareness. It knows that it knows. It is akin to a camera that not only sees the world, but is also quietly aware that it is seeing. In Being and Nothingness, Sartre embarks on a quiet journey, commencing with nothingness as the foundational basis of existence. He then thoughtfully navigates to how we, in our human experience, attempt to fill this profound void with social roles or constructed, often inauthentic, identities. Finally, he gently yet firmly rejects the psychoanalytical framework of Freud. But first, let us softly explore this concept of nothingness. To truly grasp nothingness, let us imagine a hypothetical entity we shall call Mr. Self. Mr. Self quietly drifts through space, occasionally bumping into objects and obstacles, like rocks. Through these random gentle collisions, it slowly begins to shape itself into something. Sartre, in his poetic articulation, writes, "Nothingness carries being in its heart." To understand Sartre's deeper insights, let us gently return to Martin Heidegger. The German philosopher, in his quiet contemplation, asserted that our existence can be distilled down to two temporal bookends, birth and death. Thus, we exist fundamentally in time. In other words, our life is finite, meaning our time as a conscious being is profoundly limited. Being and time, in this view, are two sides of the same coin, inseparable. Sartre takes this as his starting point, but then, with a subtle shift in focus, he concentrates purely on the being itself. Instead of dwelling on time, he reorients his gaze towards nothingness. Since we possess no divine essence or preordained purpose, we exist in our fundamental state, as nothing. In other words, our very nothingness imbues us with an absolute freedom, a quiet capacity to drift and create. However, this nothing being must quietly contend with the external world, the solid objects, the presence of other people which, in their tangible reality, gently curtail our boundless freedom. Through our interactions with the world and with others, we are compelled to make choices, and each choice, while shaping us, also inherently limits our possibilities, often inducing a quiet sense of anxiety. To gently escape these constraints, this perceived limit on our inherent freedom, we often retreat into our imagination, or we quietly seek guidance from others, or defer authority to a revered figure, perhaps even God, to make choices for us, thus alleviating the burden of personal responsibility. In essence, existence is much like walking through a quiet wilderness, fraught with gentle dangers and subtle pitfalls that naturally limit our freedom. To escape this non-freedom, we seek answers within the sanctuary of our minds, imagining or inventing solutions. This often leads us, quite unconsciously, to adopt prescribed roles in life, or to seek refuge within an identity thoughtfully handed to us, be it nationality, a profession, an activist, and so forth. Much like fully fleshed out characters in a novel, one might even quietly admit, I am a YouTuber because I wish to fill the gentle void of my existence. We take on these roles in a subtle act of self-preservation, to escape the profound anguish that stems both from the lack of predefined choices and, paradoxically, from the overwhelming abundance of choices we encounter. Thus, sandwiched between the boundless expanse of an unbridled imagination or thought and the tightly constrained, regulated world of external actions, we begin to gently forge a sense of self. In other words, the self is quietly created by free thoughts, drifting in nothingness, gently colliding with the unfree external world of existence. Hence, we are beings in nothingness. A good analogy to help us quietly grasp this concept might be that of a planet. It began as a misshapen rock, quietly floating through the vastness of space, until, through the gentle pull of gravity, or countless collisions with other celestial objects, it gradually shed its rough edges, assumed a more spherical form, and found a stable orbit in which it could serenely exist. However, for Sartre, humans are profoundly different. We exist not merely. For Sartre, bad faith represents the negation of existence as a thing for itself. For instance, when we adopt a role or a job, we subtly act as if we exist for others, or as if we are a thing in itself. A waiter, for example, might act as though their sole purpose is to serve. Sartre observes, society demands that he limit himself to his function. There are indeed many precautions to imprison a man in what he is, as if we lived in perpetual fear that he might escape from it, that he might break away and suddenly elude his condition. In other words, their entire being, their very essence, is quietly reduced to their occupation. This holds true also for social status, nationality, or even identifying as a fan of a particular sports team. For Sartre, as sentient beings, humans can never entirely become a thing in itself. So what we often do is attempt or pretend to be a teacher or a YouTuber, thereby reducing our entire complex existence to a single role. This, he argues, is bad faith or self-deception. Why do we engage in this? It gently limits our freedom, the overwhelming expanse of endless choices we face in life, acting as a quiet coping mechanism. A clearly defined role or action can bring a sense of calm as we are freed from the anxieties of endless choices or the fear of making mistakes. In other words, boundless freedom, an excess of choices, can paradoxically paralyze us. To gently escape bad faith, Sartre suggests we must accept our existence for what it truly is, not for what it is not. An authentic person, he argues, faces endless choices at any given moment, constantly confronting the open expanse of the future. But a person acting solely as a waiter, for example, limits themselves to one defined choice, which is inauthentic, an act of bad faith. For Sartre, bad faith also extends to societal norms, moral values, religious dogmas, and legal obligations, all of which subtly curtail our existential journey toward fulfillment as truly authentic beings. While social or moral values are often created by others, Sartre also considers dwelling excessively on our own past as a form of bad faith. We often limit our future projections based on what has happened to us in the past, and this too he considers a subtle deception. If we have had a painful romantic experience with one person, we might unconsciously project that negativity onto all future partners, which is a quiet form of bad faith. Proust, in his sprawling novel, immersed himself entirely in the past, meticulously attempting to regain or recreate his past selves, to reclaim lost time. Sartre gently asserts that this is living inauthentically, for it keeps us fixed in a past that no longer exists, rather than embracing the vibrant present or the unfolding future. Sartre's philosophy, at its heart, holds a quiet, teleologically progressive vision, much like that of Hegel and Marx, a belief that we are subtly moving towards perfection or completion. Sartre dedicates a substantial portion of his book to a quiet, yet profound discussion of sex. He treats sex as a fundamentally social act, not merely a biological or physical imperative. Being for others is, in itself, another subtle form of bad faith. When we forge relationships with others, we often tend to limit our own freedom in exchange for acceptance. Sartre offers the quiet example of a shop mannequin that we sometimes, for a fleeting moment, mistake for a real person. Our behavior subtly shifts when we realize it is not a conscious being. This vividly illustrates the extent to which we regulate our behavior for others, dependent on the nature of our relationships. The closer the bond, the more we tend to curtail our own, or the other's freedom to simply be for themselves, rather than for others. Thus our very purpose can quietly become one of being for others, rather than a free existence in itself. We exist in a sense to maintain the happiness of the other. For instance, we might do everything in our power to make our partner happy, which Sartre gently suggests is nothing less than emotional alienation. For our entire being becomes quietly held hostage by how they make us feel, and how we in turn make them feel. Love then, in this existential lens, becomes nothing but a bad faith conflict, a quiet battleground for control over the other. We desire them, and we desire them exclusively for ourselves, and no one else. It is perhaps no wonder that Sartre maintained an open relationship with Simone. In reality, Simone did not exercise that freedom as extensively as Sartre did, which perhaps quietly hints at subtle biological differences between men and women. Men possess millions of sperm, perpetually ready, while women are endowed with a single egg, a biological reality that may influence the subtle levels and intensities of sexual urges between the sexes. Sartre, however, quietly rejects a purely biological explanation for sex. For Sartre, sex is our profound yet fleeting attempt to create a sense of completion, but upon orgasm, one returns to square one, to the inherent nothingness and emptiness of existence. It is akin to hiking up a majestic mountain or leaping on a bungee cord. The profound experience in its essence is never truly complete. I believe Sartre might stretch his point a little thin by asserting that there is no biological basis for sex. Evolution, it seems, pays little heed to Sartre's opinion, for he himself failed to procreate, and thus his genetic lineage quietly ended with him. However, Sartre does subtly distinguish sex from other fundamental human urges such as hunger and survival, because for sex to occur, a second person is inherently required, unless one chooses the solitary DIY route. The third major point illuminated in Being and Nothingness is consciousness. For Sartre, our consciousness is the very crucible of who we are. Anything of which we are not conscious or aware simply does not constitute us. This directly challenges the fundamental premise of psychoanalysts, who argue that consciousness is merely the tip of the iceberg, with the unconscious controlling a vast majority of our choices and actions in life. According to Sartre, Sigmund Freud's psychoanalysis subtly absolved his patients of responsibility by attributing their behavior to a hidden unconscious. Sartre gently argues that there is a paradox inherent in psychoanalysis, which relies on patients reporting a hidden world of unconsciousness, where repressed emotions are supposedly kept. You either know or you do not know. If you do not know, how can you consciously repress those emotions, urges, and ideas? Repressed emotions hidden in the unconscious are for Sartre merely an excuse. He posits that if a patient has repressed certain emotions or urges and they refuse to divulge such unsavory ideas, then on some level they must be conscious of them. Thus, the theory of a hidden unconscious, he argues, is fundamentally flawed. Pretending not to know is, in his view, a form of self-deception, a quiet act of self-preservation. We lie, he suggests, to avoid taking responsibility. If we self-censor or hide something in our unconscious, it must by definition be a conscious decision. You do not hide something that you are unaware of. We knowingly hide treasures or past mistakes. Therefore, for Sartre, the theory of the unconscious, posited by Freud and Jung, is nothing but a subtle excuse, designed to make their patients feel better about their own difficult choices in life. To gently summarize, in Being and Nothingness, Sartre, much like Heidegger, thoughtfully distinguishes between being in itself, like non-conscious phenomena, such as a tree or a rock, and being for itself, like human beings. The crucial difference lies in this: the thing in itself exists, yet is neither aware of its own existence, nor possesses freedom, whereas the thing for itself is not only profoundly aware of its own existence, but also, because of this very consciousness, we are in a profound sense condemned to be free. Thus, Sartre's existentialism is gently founded upon nothingness, from which existence quietly emerges. Now let us delve deeper into the quiet intricacies of his philosophy. The ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle, in his quiet reflections, posited that everything in the world possesses a purpose or a telos. A pen, for instance, has a clear purpose to be used for writing. It was created by a maker for that specific function. In other words, a pen possesses an inherent essence to be written with. Plato, too, placed essence before existence, suggesting that everything in the observable world is but a mere shadow, a fleeting reflection of an ideal perfect form that exists only as pure ideas. In essence, the dominant philosophical view for centuries was that essence preceded existence. But Sartre gently challenges this deeply ingrained notion. He argues that if we truly quietly contemplate human beings, we realize they possess no intrinsic preordained purpose in life. Humans, unlike a pen, are not created for a particular function. As Sartre famously declared, first of all man exists, turns up, appears on the scene, and only afterwards defines himself. Sartre therefore gently rejects both religious and traditional philosophical essentialism by asserting that existence precedes essence. We simply exist, and only then do we, through our choices and actions, earn our essence. It is not something bestowed upon us from birth. Of course, if one views humanity from a purely biological perspective, we might observe a purpose to perpetuate our species. From a civilizational standpoint, we are perhaps expected to quietly carry the torch of our culture. For Marx, the purpose might have been to overthrow capitalism and forge an egalitarian utopia. But for Sartre, his focus was profoundly and unequivocally on the individual level. As a species, yes, we may have the task of continuing life, or as a class to create a more just society, but as individuals, we are not created for any specific predefined purpose. An individual's life, in its raw, unadulterated form, is, he suggests, meaningless, an empty vessel. Yet, instead of this meaninglessness dissolving into gloom or succumbing to despair, Sartre, in his quiet optimism, proposes that this very emptiness, this gentle void, is an astonishing opportunity for us to create our own meaning. In other words, the blank slate of our being empowers us to draw our own essence, to carve our own statue, a creation of which we can be profoundly proud. He beautifully states, "As far as men go, it is not what they are that interests me, but what they can become." The German philosopher Immanuel Kant, in his profound theory of knowledge, thoughtfully distinguished between phenomena, our immediate experience of the world through our senses, and noumena, the world in itself, which by its very nature remains ultimately unknowable to us. In essence, our understanding of the world is limited to our perception of the phenomenal realm. Consequently, we cannot directly apprehend the world as it truly is, in itself. Sartre, with quiet discernment, adapted this distinction between phenomena and noumena to construct his own existential theory. According to Sartre, there exists a crucial difference between an object in itself and an object for itself. What, then, is this quiet distinction? To understand it, let us consider a pen once more. A pen is an object in itself. It possesses a purpose because someone thoughtfully created it for a specific function. It cannot of its own volition alter its purpose. So a pen, as an object in itself, can only react if someone gently pushes it across paper. It cannot of its own accord choose to write. Now, when it comes to human beings, Sartre quietly believed we possess no creator. In other words, we have no inherent essence. We begin from nothingness. Most philosophers throughout history, in their quiet contemplations, embraced the idea of a pre-existing human essence. Thus, essentialism had long been the dominant approach in philosophy. Sartre, however, turned this notion gently on its head, proclaiming that everything commences with existence, and thus existentialism was born. This philosophy of the blank slates empowers us to sculpt our own unique essence. This means we possess the profound capacity to be like an object for itself. Because we are conscious of our existence, we are uniquely positioned to create our own purpose. Since we are born as blank slates, nothingness is, in a sense, our foundational essence, and this gifts us the extraordinary chance to become an object for itself. Of course, Sartre quietly understood that many individuals do not seize this profound opportunity to become who they truly wish to be. Instead, most people, he observed, regress into a state akin to being objects in themselves. They merely react to the world around them. They either quietly believe in God or defer to some other moral authority, allowing external forces to dictate their choices. To gently free ourselves from this state of existing for others, Sartre urges us to become active, to take quiet initiative, to carve out a unique self. This, he emphasizes, entails taking profound responsibility for our own lives and our actions. Those who rely on the authority of others tend to be reactive to the world and often assign blame to external factors for their misfortunes. They lament their fate, perceiving themselves as victims. Sartre, conversely, wished for people to embrace their nothingness as a fertile ground for creating their own essence. In his most influential book, Being and Nothingness, Sartre quietly argues that we are born without an inherent essence. In other words, we exist before we become who we are. Since we do not arrive pre-assembled with a fixed identity, this bestows upon us the profound freedom to discover and shape our essence. As an atheist, Sartre did not subscribe to the existence of God or a divine creator. He famously, yet gently, declared that we are condemned to be free. This very freedom empowers us to make choices in life, to select certain paths for ourselves. But with this freedom, as Uncle Ben wisely whispered, comes responsibility. Sartre, In his quiet studies read Martin Heidegger's renowned book Being and Time, in which the German philosopher located human authenticity in our acute awareness of death. In essence, when we are fully awake to the idea of our own mortality, we can live authentically, the opposite of an authentic life. In this view would be to escape from the reality of death, to quietly lie to ourselves, or even to distract ourselves from it by focusing on superficial matters and abdicating responsibility for our own lives. Sartre shared a similar perspective, that our quiet awareness of death can subtly shift our focus from merely knowing reality to profoundly experiencing reality. It compels us to carefully choose our actions and expressions. It is through our thoughtful actions, he believed, that we earn the essence of who we are. In other words, we are free in how we act or react to the external world, and this freedom comes with the profound weight of responsibility once we take deliberate steps in life. As conscious beings, we are keenly aware of what we do. Not only that, we are also profoundly self-aware of how we feel and how we perceive ourselves and others. This self-awareness subtly compels us to judge our own actions with care. And not only that, it also quietly enables us to judge others. Since we in turn judge others, others inevitably judge us too. In his 1944 play, No Exit, Sartre famously and chillingly stated that hell is other people. In other words, we are constantly, subtly, being judged by others, and so we strive to present ourselves in a way that is appealing to them. It becomes even more pronounced after our death, as we enter a kind of hell where others continue to judge us forever, without us being able to defend ourselves. Sartre was also influenced by the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, who is often considered the first existentialist philosopher. Sartre, however, harbored a quiet disagreement with Kierkegaard. Because the Danish philosopher believed in God, Sartre, being an atheist, gently inverted Kierkegaard's concept of good faith, a person's belief in God, and used the contrasting term bad faith to describe the act of denying one's own freedom or relying on a divine power to create excuses for oneself. By granting power to God or another external entity, an individual subtly diminishes their autonomy and their profound capacity to shape their own life. Sartre was also keenly aware that denying God bestowed upon humans an immense freedom, a boundless expanse that, while empowering for some, could induce a quiet anxiety for many. Kierkegaard, too, recognized that much of our anxiety stems from our freedom to make choices and the quiet imperative to live with those choices. Sartre also acknowledged the profound anguish that this freedom causes. But for Sartre to alleviate the anxiety of our choices, he argued that each choice we make should be judged on its own merits. In isolation, we should not judge someone solely by their past history, but rather by the action at hand. This, he believed, liberates the individual from their tribal or religious affiliations and past lives, and it bestows both responsibility and, crucially, authority upon the individual. Sartre firmly rejected essentialism, a philosophy that suggested we are endowed with a fixed human essence over which we have no control. From an essentialist perspective, if someone makes a single mistake, their entire person is, in a sense, tainted. But Sartre adopted a more empirical approach, quietly judging each action in isolation rather than the totality of the person in question. In other words, Sartre's existentialism gently liberates the individual from their social, historical, or religious ties, and even from the weight of their own past history. Sartre also quietly employed a Kantian moral imperative, urging individuals to act in a way that, if everyone else acted similarly, would not result in chaos. In essence, whatever you choose to do, you should be able to accept that everyone else on the planet could also do the same. Thus Sartre believed in a moral universalism. You should treat others in the very way you wish to be treated by them. However, despite his deeply individualistic philosophy of existentialism, Sartre consistently aligned himself with the group ideology of Marxism, and also regarded culture as an important cornerstone of a person's development. His philosophy of existentialism, which posits that we can shape our own destiny, can be traced back to the profound ideas of Hegel and Marx. For both Hegel and Marx, we are products of history, yet we also possess the capacity to influence history. Marx famously stated that it is our task to change history. Sartre held the same quiet belief that we are capable of changing both history and society. He envisioned an egalitarian world where the poor could participate in the social and political sphere with the same agency that the rich had exercised for centuries. Despite quietly identifying himself as an anarchist, Sartre's political and philosophical views often presented subtle contradictions. On the one hand, he bestowed upon the individual the profound freedom to sculpt something of themselves and to embrace responsibility. Yet, on the other hand, he was actively engaged in social protests and defended the Soviets, whose system significantly curtailed individual freedom within the Soviet Union. He recognized the powerful influence of the media and the elite in shaping people's opinions, acknowledging that in reality, not everyone possessed the same degree of freedom to carve out their own essence. Thus, he quietly grappled throughout his life with the tension between class identity and individual identity. As a member of the bourgeois class and later an influential public figure, he undoubtedly enjoyed far more autonomy than the average French person. Of course, Sartre's political involvement can, for the sake of clarity, be gently separated from the core tenets of his philosophy. Now let us quietly shift our focus and delve into 10 philosophical insights and quiet lessons we can glean from Sartre's profound writings and his remarkable life, allowing these reflections to gently guide us towards a deeper understanding and tranquil rest. Lesson 1. Life's absurd, so is death. Sartre, in his profound contemplation, observed every existing thing is born without reason, prolongs itself out of weakness, and dies by chance. In 1939, Sartre published a powerful short story called The Wall. It tells the quiet, harrowing tale of a prisoner during the Spanish Civil War who is facing the firing squad. Hence the poignant title The Wall, symbolizing the brutal, inescapable reality of death that we all must at some point confront. The inmate is informed that if he were to reveal the whereabouts of his comrade, his own imminent death sentence would be spared. At first he steadfastly refuses to cooperate, pondering the quiet futility of life itself. But at the very last moment, a flicker of cunning ignites, and he changes his mind, thinking he can quietly outwit the police. Yet, fate, in its absurd twist, intervenes. He provides the authorities with a random fabricated address, and by a cruel irony, his comrade happens to have, by pure chance, moved into that exact random house. The prisoner's life is spared from execution, but his comrade is tragically shot dead. Sartre, through this quiet narrative, illuminates the profound absurdity and sheer randomness that pervades both life and death. From our very conception to our birth, through the trials and tribulations of our earthly journey, and finally to our ultimate demise, all are touched by this unpredictable, quiet randomness. Sartre muses, "Death is a continuation of my life without me." Lesson 2. Nothingness is an opportunity. Sartre, in a liberating assertion, states, "Life has no meaning up." Lesson 3. We are condemned to freedom. Sartre's most iconic declaration, a quiet whisper that echoes through the annals of philosophy, is man is condemned to be free, because once thrown into the world, He is responsible for everything he does. If one were to distill Sartre's intricate philosophy into a single overarching idea, it would undoubtedly be freedom. On a purely practical level, it often appears that we possess little, if any, freedom when it comes to the grand foundational decisions of life. We cannot choose our family, our country of birth, our name, our age, our physical appearance, our height, our cultural heritage, or our native language. So how, one might quietly ponder, can Sartre assert that we are condemned to be free? As individuals, we often find ourselves seemingly at the mercy of society, the legal system, our parents, teachers, the currents of history, the weight of tradition, the dictates of morality, the tenets of religion, and the concept of God. When one quietly arrays all these authoritative figures around oneself, it might indeed seem as though our freedom is severely curtailed. Yet Sartre argues that on a deeper, more fundamental level, none of these authorities can genuinely restrict our capacity for free thought. It is within the boundless realm of thought itself that we are truly condemned to be free. Indeed, Sartre formulated much of his philosophy while enduring confinement in a German prison, a profound testament to the unassailable nature of inner freedom. In his 1945 novel, The Age of Reason, told from the quiet perspectives of various characters, the story centers on a teacher who battles against societal expectations and biological imperatives, as he wishes to avoid fatherhood and seeks money for his girlfriend's abortion. We may indeed confront social, political, and even biological limitations, but no one can truly prevent us from imagining anything we desire. It is in our imagination, that limitless inner space, that we are truly condemned to be free, for we can conjure forth that which does not exist, and we cannot escape the boundless expanse of our own imagination, no matter how terrifyingly vivid it may sometimes be. Lesson 4. Take responsibility. Sartre, with his profound conviction, declared, "Man can will nothing unless he has first understood that he must count on no one but himself, that he is alone, abandoned on earth in the midst of his infinite responsibilities, without help, with no other aim than the one he sets himself, with no other destiny than the one he forges for himself on this earth." The phrase, "with freedom comes responsibility," is often repeated, almost a quiet cliché. For Sartre, however, after the concept of freedom, responsibility stands as the most crucial philosophical doctrine. In a world devoid of a preordained God, Sartre asserts, the true meaning of life resides in our freedom to embrace responsibility. In his 1946 essay, Existentialism is a Humanism, Sartre squarely places the weight of responsibility not on God or society, but unequivocally on the individual. 18th century European humanism gently emerged to replace God with humanity, faith with rationality, and the church with the university. In essence, humanism positioned humans as the masters of the planet, no longer reliant on divine guidance or ecclesiastical authority. While humanism adopted a more group-centered or institutional approach, focusing on government, democracy, civil societies, and so forth, Sartre, in his profound individualism, placed the ultimate responsibility on each solitary individual. He stated, "Their being is not determined, so it is up to everyone to create their own existence, for which they are then responsible. They cannot not be free. There is a form of necessity for freedom, which can never be given up." Just as humanism was an optimistic project to gently liberate individuals from the constraints of religion and tradition, existentialism for Sartre is also a quietly optimistic philosophy that views the individual as the ultimate sculptor of themselves. We are free to become who we wish to be, but also profoundly responsible for whatever may come our way. Lesson 5. Don't live in bad faith. Sartre quietly pondered, perhaps it's inevitable, perhaps one has to choose between being nothing at all and impersonating what one is. This insightful line from Age of Reasons speaks volumes. It all sounds so noble to embrace responsibility. But when confronted with life's myriad choices, we often experience anguish, anxiety, and frequently, a paralyzing analysis paralysis. It becomes so much easier if others simply make certain decisions for us. While we might all, in quiet moments, yearn to be a powerful leader, few truly wish to experience the profound torment that Hamlet, or indeed any leader or parent, endures when faced with agonizing choices. What if we make mistakes? So we often subtly surrender our freedom to others, to parents, to the government, to experts, to doctors, and so forth, allowing them to make choices for us. But Sartre gently warns that if you rely on others or adopt a role meticulously carved out for you by external forces, you are living an inauthentic life. He labels this bad faith. You are not truly genuine. You are merely acting out a role created by others. The path to true faith, or an authentic self, can only be forged through our own actions and our own mistakes. It is through these very mistakes that we can genuinely craft something of ourselves. Embrace life's choices, make mistakes, and crucially, own up to your mistakes. That is how you truly become someone. Do not hire a sculptor to fashion you. Rather, it is through our own actions that we create ourselves, and by extension subtly influence society. We are the architects of our own being. No deity stands ready to assist us. So we might as well live our true selves, rather than some contrived role society, or our company has quietly fashioned for us. Lesson 6. Hell is other people. No Exit is a 1944 play that tells the quiet, chilling story of a man and two women confined to a waiting room in the afterlife, a punishment for their earthly transgressions. In essence, they are irrevocably trapped in their grave, with no hope of escape. The twist, however, is that all three are now together, awaiting their eternal torment. Initially, the three characters quietly prevaricate about their crimes, but they all, in their shared confinement, implicitly know that everyone else is lying. After some tense arguments, they quietly decide to come clean and confess their true transgressions. The man, Joseph Garcin, admits to mistreating his wife, but that, he reveals, is a lesser sin. He was actually executed for profound cowardice during a war. One of the women, Inés Serrano, a lesbian, seduced her cousin's wife through cunning manipulation, an act that led to her cousin's death and the eventual asphyxiation of both women. The other woman, Estelle Rigaud, from a wealthy background, finds herself in this room because she murdered her own child, an act that prompted the child's father to take his own life. As they spend more time together, the sexual tension in the room subtly escalates, leading to Garcin and Estelle growing closer. This sparks intense jealousy in Inez, who then mocks Garcin for his cowardice. As one might expect, he attempts to escape once again. After violently pushing the door a few times, it suddenly swings open, but he finds himself too consumed by shame to leave, precisely because the very cause of his execution was army desertion. It is here that he arrives at the famous chilling conclusion that hell is other people. So profound is this realization that, despite Estelle's fervent attempts, Garcin refuses to make love to her in the presence of another woman. Estelle, in a fit of quiet fury, stabs the other woman, who merely laughs at her, pointing out that they are already dead. Soon they all quietly realize that they are irrevocably stuck in the room together for all eternity, and their only recourse is to accept their fate and simply get on with it. In this story, Sartre quietly seeks to illustrate how we constantly perceive ourselves through the eyes of others. For men, courage is often the most paramount value, and respect the most crucial currency. Thus, Garcin is forever condemned for his cowardice. He can find no rest until anyone tells him that he is not a coward. He sought this absolution from Estelle, who accepted him, but Inez steadfastly refused. For the women, it was their sexual transgressions that forever condemned them in the quiet judgment of others. Society in this view functions as a perpetual mirror, relentlessly reflecting our good, our bad, and our ugly sides, no matter how diligently we strive to present only our best. Dostoevsky once suggested that consciousness itself was a disease. Sartre, in his own unique way, transformed this into the quiet torment that hell is other people. For example, as a YouTuber, one might receive hundreds of positive comments, but a single negative one tends to quietly stick. So despite our yearning for individualism, we cannot entirely disentangle ourselves from others, and perhaps the path to peace lies in quietly accepting that hell in its subtle forms truly is other people. Lesson 7. Don't be a victim. Sartre, in a profound call to agency, asserts, "It is therefore senseless to think of complaining, since nothing foreign has decided what we feel, what we live, or what we are." Sartre himself was a man of small stature and by conventional standards was not considered handsome, yet he never used these physical traits as an excuse. Instead, he channeled his prodigious intellect into profound thought and powerful writing. In fact, he implicitly suggested that having a perceived handicap should in fact serve as an even greater motivation for us to develop ourselves, to hone our craft, to offer unique social value, and to push the boundaries of what is possible. Sartre, when captured by the Germans, instead of succumbing to despair or resigning himself to his fate, used his time in prison to quietly read a challenging book by a German philosopher, Martin Heidegger, who himself was quite close to the Nazis. No matter where you find yourself, no matter the constraints, there is always an opportunity to engage in something that is meaningful to you. In his 1940 essay, The Imaginary, a phenomenological psychology of the imagination, Sartre argues that while our perception of reality is always limited, dependent on our angle of view, our age, and the duration of our observation, when we imagine an object, it appears as a complete whole entity. Since we possess the profound capacity to imagine things, Sartre concludes, we are inherently free. Not only can no one prevent us from imagining things, but no one can truly prevent us from achieving things either. Only we ourselves can stop our progress, when we give up and quietly choose to live in bad faith. Lesson 8. Do not live in the past. Sartre, with a gentle metaphor, suggests, people are like dice. We throw ourselves in the direction of our own choosing. Sartre's philosophy of existentialism is a direct yet quiet challenge to the philosophy of essentialism, the deeply ingrained idea that we are born with a fixed essence. Aristotle, as we recalled, believed everything has a telos, or purpose. In religious contexts, we are created by God, and thus our essence is also divinely created. But Sartre begins with the clean slates argument that we possess no inherent essence, only existence. The past in this view stretches only so far, for you are nothing before you are born. Everything begins with your own existence. Sartre was a significant, though quiet, critic of Marcel Proust, whose monumental novel, as we discussed, is almost entirely devoted to the past. Proust exquisitely describes how we leave subtle bits and pieces of ourselves in the past as we age. But Sartre also offers a response to psychoanalysts like Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, who in his view focused excessively on past individual and collective memories. For Sartre, the past is simply the past. What truly matters is the now, and most importantly, the future. Interestingly, Louis Ferdinand Céline's masterpiece, Journey to the End of the Night, quietly questioned whether future progress was nothing more than sacrificing oneself for unknown others. Sartre, as a Marxist, chose to focus his energy on the future. Thus, dwelling too much in the past can subtly distract us from the present, and most crucially, from the boundless possibilities of the future. It is not, he suggests, important which path you have traversed, but the path you are choosing to walk right now. Lesson 9. You cannot ignore the past. While Sartre's philosophy radiates a quiet optimism regarding the future, he did, arguably, sometimes fail to adequately credit our cultural past. Sartre has, after all, learned and developed his ideas from those who came before him. His hugely influential book, Being and Nothingness, is not only inspired by, but also a direct, thoughtful response to Heidegger's Being and Time. So while existentialism liberates us from religious dogmas or traditional constraints, empowering us to craft something profound of ourselves, we cannot, in truth, entirely ignore our cultural past. Friedrich Nietzsche, who was also a profound existentialist, acknowledged that we build upon the accumulated works of those who preceded us. His Übermensch, for instance, undergoes a camel stage in which he diligently slaves to learn skills from others. We do not always necessarily start from absolute zero. So while Sartre was undeniably a brilliant philosopher, he perhaps fell short in fully appreciating our cultural past, and in doing so might have inadvertently given a kind of free rein to some individuals to disregard or even destroy whatever came before. Today, in some contexts, social justice warriors might topple statues, cancel figures, or boycott comedians or anyone who disagrees with them. While Sartre himself might have been quietly outraged by such actions, his philosophy, by emphasizing starting from nothingness, could, on one interpretation, be seen as allowing for such behavior, as it posits that we are supposed to build anew from a clean slate. Lesson 10. We cannot ignore biology. Sartre, in a moment of profound personal exasperation, uttered, "It is disgusting. Why must we have bodies?" As a man of short stature, and by societal norms, not conventionally attractive, one can almost feel the quiet echo of his pain in this statement. Yet, one cannot, ultimately, ignore the immutable facts of biology. Sartre argued that neither God nor biology has bestowed upon us a fixed purpose. We are born, he suggested, out of accident and chance. The only purpose that truly exists is the one we consciously choose. Much like Marx, Sartre, to some extent, quietly overlooked Darwinian evolution, and consequently, certain aspects of human nature. Sartre's starting point is nothingness, the idea that we have no inherent essence prior to our existence. But I believe he might have neglected our essence at the DNA level. While we may not possess our fully formed individual self from birth, we are undeniably endowed with a unique DNA fingerprint that shapes our height, our nose, our eye color, and countless other traits. These biological realities are, in truth, profoundly significant in shaping our lives and experiences. However, Sartre's philosophy operates not primarily on a physiological level, but on the profound plane of consciousness. He also firmly rejected the psychoanalytical theory that the unconscious fundamentally determines who we are. Sartre's philosophy, therefore, operates almost entirely on a conscious level. In other words, Sartre, perhaps, credits the human rational faculty with a little too much power. In reality, however, we are often quite irrational when it comes to significant decisions in life. For instance, the urge to engage in sex and procreate is an immensely powerful force within us, and Schopenhauer profoundly understood that this urge is often irrational, controlled by a blind primal will residing deep within us. I suppose Sartre, in his own way, sought to awaken us to the idea that our sole purpose is not simply to continue life. Thus, he engaged in sex for pleasure, not primarily for procreation. While men and women possess remarkably similar intellectual capacities, the way we perceive the opposite gender can be profoundly different. Indeed, his open relationship with Simone de Beauvoir quietly illustrates this point. While Sartre was openly engaging in sexual relationships with multiple women, Simone did not exhibit the same intense thirst for sex with other men. While Sartre was perhaps subtly aware of such biological predispositions, he often downplayed the profound impact of biological hardwiring, which we may not be able to fundamentally alter. Today, while individuals are increasingly free to transform their lives, their identities, their gender, their nationality, and so forth, Sartre's philosophy might be a little too optimistic when it comes to the sheer ease of creating our own identity exactly as we wish it to be. In reality, a significant portion of what we do is, to some extent, predetermined by our biology. Sartre himself did not define himself within a single day or month or even a year. It took him many, many years of dedicated effort to become the profound figure he eventually was. He devoted years of quiet, hard work to meticulously sculpt himself into a philosopher and a writer. Today we often seek quick solutions and shortcuts. Unfortunately, while these quick fixes and shortcuts may offer temporary relief, they may not, in the long run, provide the deeper, more lasting answers we truly seek. While an Instagram filter might render me beautifully flawless, I cannot, in the quiet solitude of the morning, ignore the unfiltered reflection I see in the mirror. Jean-Paul Sartre's philosophy of existentialism gently liberates us from the quiet weight of God, the constraints of tradition, and the subtle pressures of societal norms and values which we sometimes passively accept. But this profound freedom, this boundless liberty, comes with an immense responsibility. I believe that in today's world,